May 8, 1945. The guns stopped. Across Europe, exhausted soldiers dropped their weapons and breathed for the first time in years. Church bells rang in Paris. Crowds flooded the streets of London. In shattered cities from Warsaw to Amsterdam, survivors wept and held each other and tried to comprehend that it was finally over. But inside the retreating columns of defeated German soldiers, one specific group was not celebrating. They were terrified. These were the men of the SS, the organization that had built and operated the death camps, massacred entire villages, and murdered millions of civilians across a continent for over a decade. And now, with Germany collapsed and their protection gone forever, they were running. They tore insignia from their uniforms. They burned identification documents. They stole civilian clothing from the dead and invented new names. Some fled into the mountains. Some tried to dissolve into the mass of ordinary German prisoners. But the world had not forgotten their faces. What happened next? Across multiple countries, in forests and city streets and mountain roads, became one of the most unforgiving reckonings in the history of modern warfare. To understand why captured SS soldiers were shot on sight across Europe, without hesitation, without formal proceedings, without remorse, you have to understand what they had actually done. The SS began in 1925 as a handful of personal bodyguards surrounding Adolf Hitler. By 1929, Heinrich Himmler had taken control, and his vision was something far darker than a security detail. He wanted an organization of absolute believers, men conditioned to execute any order against any target without a single trace of moral hesitation. At SS training academies, recruits were not simply taught to fight. They were systematically broken down and rebuilt. Forced marches in freezing temperatures, ideological sessions lasting hours. Recruits who showed compassion for a simulated victim were told that empathy was a character defect with no place inside the SS. By 1933, this organization had expanded from a few dozen guards to over 52,000 members, with its own schools, its own command structure, and a rapidly growing sense of its own terrible purpose. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, SS mobile killing units called Einsatzgruppen followed the army. They pulled civilians from their homes. Men, women, elderly marched them to nearby fields and forest clearings and shot them into pre-dug trenches. Within weeks, the bodies of ordinary Polish civilians were filling mass graves across hundreds of kilometers of occupied territory. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, the scale became incomprehensible. Einsatzgruppe alone, a single operational unit, killed more than 249,000 people within its first year of operation. Entire Jewish communities that had existed for centuries were erased from the map in single afternoons. Then came the camps. By 1945, Allied investigators, attempting to map the full scope of what the SS had constructed, counted more than 44,000 individual camps, sub-camps, and transit facilities across Europe. Auschwitz alone, run by SS Commandant Rudolf Hess, killed more than 1.1 million people. The gas chambers and crematoria operated on a continuous daily schedule, like a factory with a single product. And when Germany began losing the war, the SS did not slow down. It accelerated. On June 10, 1944, 4 days after the Allied landings at Normandy, an SS division arrived in the French village of Oradour-sur-Glane. They separated the men from the women and children. The men were taken to barns and shot. The women and children were herded into the village church. Then the church was set on fire. 643 people died that single afternoon. The French government later preserved the village exactly as the SS left it. Burned walls, collapsed roof, melted iron, as a permanent record of what was done there. In December 1944, near Malmedy in Belgium, an SS unit captured a column of surrendered American soldiers, disarmed, helpless, posing no threat whatsoever. They were marched into a snow-covered field and shot. 84 prisoners of war, murdered in cold blood. When that news spread through Allied units, it produced one lasting conclusion among soldiers on every front. Surrendering to the SS was not safe. That conclusion had direct consequences when the war ended and the situation reversed. In Czechoslovakia, resistance fighters who had spent years living underground under SS occupation knew unit designations, commanders' names, and exactly which regiments had carried out which massacres on which dates. When those units were identified, moving among retreating German columns, many SS men did not survive long enough to reach any formal detention process. In Poland, where every major death camp had been built on Polish soil, where entire cities had been destroyed, where the ground itself was saturated with the murdered dead. SS personnel attempting to flee in stolen clothing encountered something no disguise could defeat. Survivors who had spent months inside those camps and who recognized those specific faces with absolute certainty. Some SS soldiers, even after the surrender, refused to accept that it was over. Underground resistance cells called werewolf units continued ambushing Allied patrols and attacking supply convoys from forest positions across Germany and Austria. These men were not treated as surrendered soldiers. They were treated as active threats and eliminated accordingly. On October 1st, 1946, the Nuremberg Tribunal made it official. The SS was declared a criminal organization, not certain commanders, not certain units, but the entire structure from its leadership down through every man who had voluntarily sworn its oath. The reason captured SS soldiers were shot across Europe after May 1945 was never one order from one headquarters. It was 643 people locked inside a burning church. It was 84 unarmed men shot in a field of snow. It was 1.1 million human beings who walked through the gates of a single camp and never came out. When the men responsible tried to disappear into the ruins of a defeated nation, the survivors, the ones who had lived through all of it, looked at their faces and they remembered everything. Thank you for watching. If this documentary left its mark on you, if you felt the full weight of this history,